Well, good morning and welcome to the Great Transitions Senior Living Seminar Series. Today we're going to be tackling the topic of the psychology of aging. No, it is not a 3-semester course. We're going to try and condense it down for you today, and we're really glad you're here. I'm Beth Buckelew, your host. Great Transitions was founded in 2013 by Paul and Lynn Henderson to guide seniors during one of life's biggest transitions. It's a system for working with seniors and their families as their lifestyle and housing needs change. It can be 12 to 18 months of preparation to get ready to downsize or make a move, or an event can expedite that process. And we're here to stand beside you to guide you through every step of the way. It's an honor and a privilege to care for those who have cared for us for so many years. That's pretty much the Great Transitions way. Our objective here today is to educate you all and our online audience about legal, financial, housing, medical, all general issues and topics of importance relative to seniors. We're not here to sell anything. We're simply here to provide information. But we do ask you to think a little bit, to make some action items, to make a plan based on the things that you hear today. Ask yourself some questions. One of them might be, who's going to be tasked with making decisions for you when you're no longer able to do so, and will you agree with the decisions that they make? And the other side of that is, once you have created that plan, have you shared that plan with your advisors, your trusted loved ones, the people that are going to help carry that out? So we are going to jump in to tackling our topic. I'm going to ask our panelists to come up and take a seat, and I'm going to take a seat because we're going to shift gears a little bit today from the way we do things. Glad you're here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So people talk a lot, I referenced this earlier, people talk about ages a lot. So I'm in this age bracket. In fact, even on our surveys, we ask what bracket does your driver's license put you in. But today we're going to really explore the topic of stages rather than ages. Life tends to come at us in different stages, and we're all unique individuals. One person can be 75 and they're still climbing mountains, while another person can be 75 and maybe struggles with walking around the house. So there are a lot of different stages that you can be in. We're going to jump through some of those hoops today and tackle some truths. I have my good friend, mentor,
Good friend.
Yeah, really smart person, Dr. Nikki Buckelew. She flew in from Oklahoma City to be with us today, and she is an expert in the psychology of aging, and I would love for you to tell them how you got to this place in your life.
Yeah, isn't it always fun to be told that you're an expert on something and you're sitting here thinking, really, am I? So let me clarify. Expert on aging generally. Nobody's an expert on how you age, right, individually. So I think that's an important note. Not even your doctor's an expert on your aging process. But thank you for the accolades. That's
Sure.
nice to have. So Beth asked me to just kind of give a little bit about my background to give context. Rather than giving you a long resume or bio, I'm just going to give you a snapshot, right, of
That's great.
where I am today and where I came from, which will give you an idea of why we're talking about what we're talking about today. So I was one of those kids that everybody is disappointed in after they graduate high school, because they were a really great student and they were on track to go to college, and then they decided not to. That was me. And so I was going to be an attorney, and then I was going to be a journalist, and then I was going to be a preacher, and I became a realtor.
Okay.
My parents were thrilled. Just thrilled. Didn't cost them any money for me to become a realtor. But so at age 20, I got my real estate license and started selling houses. And did that for quite a while. And then I decided I did want to be a student, went back to school 10 years later, and got a degree in gerontology. Okay. Now, how many of you know what gerontology is? right? Well, now you do. But in 1995, 1997, it was a fairly new academic field or track. And the only reason I got the degree, Beth, it happened to be an adult studies night program I could take in sociology that fit my schedule.
Okay.
And I could finish it in 18 months. I didn't even know what gerontology was. I just knew I could get a degree.
Wow. Okay.
But I fell in love with the topic, and I learned so much. And I feel like I'm one of these people that believes that I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing, but God kind of puts me where I'm supposed to be at the right time for the right reasons. So I could tell you a whole story about that class, but I'll just stop there. Okay. And then, so that class led me into the master's program in counseling psychology, which I got really excited about because I loved helping people. Right?
Okay.
I was going to be an attorney, a journalist, and a preacher.
Okay.
And being a therapist, I thought, I can do all three of those things, kind of. Right?
And a realtor.
And be a realtor. And so my husband, when I finished that master's degree, he goes, one of these days, my worst nightmare is going to come true. I said, what? He said, it'll be Dr. Nikki Buckelew, realtor. That came true in 2018. So I went back to school later to get my degree in psychology because what I realized, Beth, was that being a realtor and then become a counselor, when I became a counselor, I was only a counselor for a short time. It was not my cup of tea because I couldn't solve all the problems that people had. It was depressing. I was counseling people and the problems were still there, and I'm like, wait, this is not how this is supposed to work.
Yeah.
And most of the people that I counseled were in long-term care communities, what we would call nursing homes, but now called long-term care communities. And many of these families that I counseled with were really struggling with aging issues, family dynamics, where to live, how to get there, how to pay for their care, all the things you kind of described in your introduction. And we were still selling real estate. My husband and I have been selling real estate together since 1995. And I remember walking in that day to the real estate office after my counseling day at the long-term care community. And I leaned against the door frame of the office and I said to him, I don't want to be a counselor. Now, mind you, we'd spent a lot of money on my master's program and a lot of hours on my license to be a counselor. And he goes, what do you want to do? He's a good husband. And I said, well, you know what? I don't want to be a counselor. I want to go back with you in full-time real estate, and I want to focus our attention on helping people downsize better. Okay, downsize better.
Such a need.
So here was the problem I set out to solve, and it's the same problem you're solving every day, and that is how to help people not downsize in crisis.
Yeah.
Right? Like plan ahead.
Yeah.
Or if they are downsizing in crisis due to circumstances beyond their control, how to make that an easier transition for the person, the family, the couple, whatever it might be. So all that said, that's what landed me where I am today. I got excited about that. We got really good at it in Oklahoma City. We were selling 100 or so homes a year, with about 80% of those being people who are downsizing out of a much larger house than they needed into some sort of a smaller house, sometimes retirement community, sometimes assisted living, sometimes with their kids, sometimes into a small house or garden home or apartment or condo, right? And we got really good at it. And so I said, hey, other real estate agents should be doing this. Because as you know, just as a side note, real estate agents are not terribly sensitive to some of these things, generally, but some are. And the ones who are, we started an organization to help train them, and that's who a lot of the people are you talked about in the room today, including you and Paul and Lynn. So that's how I landed here today, in a nutshell. If you want to hear the longer version, come talk to me after, and we'll get together and you can have me out to your house for a weekend.
Lots to tell. Well, thank you so much. And I think that sets the great stage for what we're going to talk about. You've worked with numerous older adults over the years. What kind of stands out to you about the human condition as it relates to aging and longevity.
Yeah. Well, first of all, that word longevity is the new word for aging, right?
Okay.
You've noticed that, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll hear, like, even AARP magazine, if you guys get it, I receive it, and it's you don't see much about aging anymore because people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about aging, and so that's part of the human condition.
Yeah.
And so we had, do they have the 5 truths, by the way? Or do you know?
No.
No? Okay. So we kind of outlined 5 truths.
Okay.
And so if I could maybe start with the first one, and I reordered them for you.
And
so
that's perfectly fine, and
Yeah.
I think this is going to be really timely. Many of the people in the room were in our series about thriving to 100.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And we got a lot of feedback when we announced that topic that, like, wait a minute. I don't want to
live to 100.
Right. I don't want to be that old, right? So I think this is really great that you're going to unpack how we can and how we can enjoy longevity maybe a little bit better.
Well, it would be nice if we can enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know about you. I had a conversation with a friend about 2 weekends ago. We were at the lake, and some boat dock friends of ours, you know how you get familiar, and then we eventually sold a house for them, and they moved into a condo, and then now they have a house down in Naples too. So they've kind of downsized, but then added a second home. And my friend Tracy, she's just turning 65-ish.
Okay.
And
young.
Yeah, you know, and healthy. And she made the comment about not having grandkids yet. And we have 4 grandkids, and I'm 53. And so I started early. My kids started early, and so she was a little bit frustrated that her boys weren't having babies yet. And
I hate to disappoint her, but boys aren't going to have babies.
I should have said that. I don't know why I wasn't thinking. That was quick. Okay, they're not even married, so they've still got a little ways. Only one of them's married. So Tracy says, I may not even live long enough to see my grandkids. And I said, now Tracy, I said, that's not true. I said, you very well will likely see your grandkids. And she said, now, even if I do, I won't get to see them graduate high school. And I said, Tracy, how old are you? And she told me, and I said, why are you thinking like this? And she goes, well, my mom and dad only lived to be X and whatever, I forget what the ages were, but they were in their 70s. And maybe one of them made it into their 80s. And so she fully anticipated, in her mind, she connected the dots. Because my parents lived to be X age, I will only live to be X age. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So our human, how many, I don't know, can I take a poll? How many people think that in the room? You've kind of thought that to yourself. Okay. A lot of people have a tendency to do that until they've surpassed their parents' ages.
Right.
My mom died at 31. I'm 53. I think that ship has sailed. Mm-hmm. And so I can't make that connection, right? But my friend Tracy could. And so it caused me to think, how many people do that? And I see it regularly when we're downsizing with people, and they talk about, well, you know, I'm not going to live that much longer, so we probably should either do this or that, whatever their this or that is. And I'll say, well, have you been diagnosed with something? And they're like, no. So you know when you're going to die?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, no, but because my parents did, I will, right? So it's that shift in thinking. And by the way, many of you in the room, how many of you have lived now longer than your parents by a show of hands? Raise your hand. A few? Yeah, okay. And so most of you, by the way, I hate to break the news to you today, but you are on track to do that.
Yeah.
And can I give them my prescription for if they don't want to?
Okay.
Right. So when I talk about living to 100, I'll ask people oftentimes, how many of you want to live to 100? And they go.
Right.
It doesn't matter the age group, by the way. A group of 40-year-olds, same as a group of 70-year-olds, etc. They don't want to live to be 100. Because what is your perception of living to 100 usually?
Oh, frail and can't get around and
on
no
life
teeth
support,
and
feeding tubes,
Yeah.
right? It's not a good look. That's what most people think. And so I just tell a group, if you don't want to live to be 100, then why are you going to the doctor, first of all? Just stop doing that. And the dentist. And stop taking your prescriptions. And you can watch way more TV and stop exercising entirely.
Maybe start smoking?
And start smoking. I mean, you may have quit years ago. Well, just pick that back up because it doesn't matter. And while you're at it, whether you drank or not, now's the time. Like, go ahead. Right? Excesses are acceptable now. If you're not going to try to live to be 100, what's the point?
Right.
And when you say that, you think, well, Nikki, that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But the reality of it is, we are doing all the right things, and many, especially the people in this room, because they're here, which means they're learning-based. Mm-hmm. So they're educating themselves, they're staying sharp. Most of them look very healthy. There's a couple of you we might talk to later. But this group is what I consider the exceptional group, mm-hmm. right? And so chances are, if anybody's going to live to be 100, it's you guys. Just take that in for a second. You're welcome. Now, what 100 looks like to you needs to shift if it's not a positive thought. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it is about psychology. It isn't. It's partly about physiology, of course. It's about going to the doctor and taking what medications you need to, if you need to, and that kind of thing, and exercising. The physiology is part of it, no doubt. And there are fields dedicated to that.
Yes.
Like major fields, right? Your insurance companies are dedicated to that. Your doctors are dedicated to that. The health food industry is dedicated. Mm-hmm. There's, they're all dedicated. Mm-hmm. And yet, so much of whether or not you live to be 100 and beyond in a positive way has to do with what's between here. It's about perspective, right? That book that I shared with you this morning, do you have it up there? Yeah? No? Okay.
It's down here.
No, you don't have to get it. That's okay. So I bring it up because I shared a book with Beth, Gladys McGarry. And she's 103 years old, lives in Scottsdale, Arizona, and is writing books for the first time in her life at age 102. She wrote a book. Right? Medical doctor. Focused on holistic healing, and she's an MD, but she integrates functional health and healing into her. And her parents were doctors. They worked in India largely when she was a kid, and so she traveled across the world, and her parents were helping with medical care there in India. And then she went and did that while she was in practice. She has 6 kids. She raised her 6 kids, and so she wrote a book. And she wrote a book on I believe it started out as 5, and now I think it's the 6 steps or 6 things you need to know about successful aging or longevity. And at 103, I paid attention. Right?
Good source.
This is not a 50-year-old writing a book.
Right, exactly.
This is a 103-year-old writing a book. It's a different perspective, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And so her perspective is very interesting because she says it's all, well, I won't get into it too much because that wasn't the topic for today, but she says it's all about love. Love, right? Now, some of you may go, oh, that's all woo-woo, whatever, But
purpose. At
103, it's purpose, exactly. It's love, it's adaptability, it's all those things. Community, yep. And so I feel like she gets down to the bare bones of it. And she says, it doesn't mean you can quit going to your doctor. It doesn't mean you should quit exercising and all these things. But if you don't have these 6 things, all those other things really aren't going to make that much difference. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And she gives some examples. I recommend that read, and Beth can get you guys that information later. Yeah.
So truth number 1 then is we're living much longer lives whether we like it or not.
Whether we like it or not.
It's a fact. We better accept it.
Yep.
Take the tools necessary to move forward in that.
Yeah, and plan, right? And plan for it, because these topics that you're delivering, and I looked at your annual schedule, and I'm like, we're really training to get older, aren't we?
Yeah.
We're training.
100%.
Yeah. So it's like running a marathon. You don't just get up one morning and decide to run a marathon. Now, some of you might. But I would get about to the parking lot, and that would be that, because I'm not a runner. I would need to train. Right? And yet people go into this stage of life, not an age thing at all, like you said. It's really a stage of life, and we've never been there before, and yet we set out to do it without much training. And most of us that are parents in the room have we had some training at least, right? We had other people guiding us and mentoring us and telling us how it worked for them. And now our kids don't do that. They don't. We were talking about that in the car on the way here today. My kids are 32? Yes, 32. One is adopted, one is biologically ours, and they both have children. One has 3 and one has an 18-month-old son and a daughter. And they don't ask us for parenting advice. Who do they ask? Google. Or their friends who don't know anything either. Right? So they don't come to people anymore with wisdom from their experience because they think it's different. And so when our son called yesterday and said his 18-month-old has COVID because she was at daycare for the very first time in her life at 18 months old, for 3 days she came home with COVID. Bless his heart. But you know what? They didn't ask us for advice. They Googled it. Right?
Yeah.
And so we, as individuals that didn't live with Google growing up, we look to other people for advice. We tend to look to others for advice. And if we don't have people older than us who have lived through that, or more experienced with things than us who have lived through that, where do we go? Where do we go to get that information? And so here is a good place, obviously. And so that's why I study it like I do, I think, is because there are academics who have data on all of these things, right?
Right.
But they're academics, and they're not really...
It's a dry read.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. You've read textbooks, right?
Yeah.
So what we need them to do is we need to understand, well, what is it that you studied, and how does that apply to me, right? And that's one of the things that we try to do through classes, just like you guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
So take us on then to our next truth that you want to unfold.
Okay. So the other one is I'm gonna skip down to this one and then come back to the other one, just so you know I haven't skipped one. So what was true for those in our parents' generation is not true for us. Okay. So think about that. I'll give you an example, a very specific example. We talked about earlier long-term care communities versus nursing homes, right? Many of you may have had the experience of having to place a loved one in a long-term care facility or nursing home, and that may have been painful for you and for them. It may be somebody in your life right now that you've had to do that with. It's different today than it was a decade ago even.
Is it?
Yeah, really different. Yeah, you want to talk about why?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very different. So there's a great book, by the way, if you wanted to study up a little bit on the history of that with a really good read, is there's a doctor named Atul Gawande, Atulgawande, I believe.
H-I. Gawande. Oh, no, you're right.
I think it's an E on the end.
Yeah, it is.
Yep. And Gawande, and he's a doctor, medical doctor, and he wrote a book called Being Mortal.
Being what?
Being Mortal.
Being mortal. And I think Nicole will put that in her notes that she sends out after the seminar. So if you didn't write down the book titles, we will get those to you.
Yeah, and in the first part of his book, he kind of goes through the history of the difference in how senior living has adapted over the years to the needs of society. And nursing communities used to be someplace that someone went when the family couldn't care for them, they couldn't stay in their home any longer, but they were an extension of the community, really, right? The families were still very involved, still very engaged, and people could live there for various different reasons, right? Now it's more of an extension of a hospital setting. So people come out of the hospital and they're only there in long-term care in many cases, not always, but in many cases, very short period of time. It's very acute care. It's very medical. It's very specifically they're there for skilled nursing, right?
And then moving on.
And then they're transitioning in end of life, right? So then assisted living came on the scene in the 80s, right? And so we have what we call now assisted living communities, which are wonderful. Those have even adapted over the years to, they've had to adapt to just really what we as a society need. But they started out being non-medical.
Correct.
And they may have offered a little medical, like medication assistance and things like that. But assisted was the key word, right? So think of the word assisted living. When we were selling real estate in 1990 to 2000, the majority of our clients were moving out of their single-family home into assisted living. And assisted living didn't mean they had a lot of problems. It just meant they needed a little assistance
So it almost felt like a 55-plus community where there were some
Yes.
people that could help out.
Yes, 24-hour support,
Right.
but more independent than not.
Yes.
More independent than not. And people would maybe, a great example of someone who would choose to move to an assisted living would be a widow or widower, who the widow may say, you know what, I don't want to take care of this big house anymore, and so I'm going to move into assisted living. A widower may say, you know, I can handle the house, but I really never learned how to cook for myself or do laundry, and I really don't want to do all those things, so I'm going to move into assisted living. It was whatever their particular needs were. They move into assisted living. They can live there a very long time, right?
Well, and plus they were being provided with community right
Community,
there.
right?
Yeah.
Community, yeah. And it wasn't medical, really. I mean, people could have some medical
Sure.
needs. But then what happened is, then came the independent living communities. So then we became, and these were still, they were there, but there weren't very many of them, right? Continuing care retirement communities were very few and far between. They were mostly up in the Northeast. They were, a lot of them, most of them were faith-based. And they were run by the Catholic Church or the Jewish faith
Denominations.
groups. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then they became more mainstream and some privatized. And so, but the independent livings, what happened when they started building those 55 and older apartments, what they call full-service independent livings, the people who moved to assisted living before went, you know, I don't really need that level of care. I'm going to move to independent living where my meals are provided, I have transportation, I have community,
Activities, yeah.
things like that. And someone to be there, peace of mind really is what they were moving into for a lot of people. And assisted living became what nursing homes used to be. So nursing homes, so now assisted livings are what nursing homes used to be. And now nursing homes are essentially, in the medical community, they'll tell you, they're an extension of the hospital. Right? Rehab. They're like rehab, and you stay there permanently, but you're there because you're in nursing care, right?
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of people there that live into their hundreds are not the people I'm talking about when I say let's live to 100. These are people who really have some pretty significant health issues, and they really need full-time medical care.
Right.
And so that there's been this evolution, and so when I say it's not the same as when your parents transitioned, if they did, or lived, if they're passed now, it's different. And so my dad is a great example. My dad is 76 years old. Okay. Which, again, in my opinion, is not old at all. And but he has COPD, really significant, severe COPD. And he still works. He has a small business. That's a whole other story for a different weekend at your house. But he struggles.
Yeah.
And he lives in his own home.
It's hard.
It is hard. He can't. He could not walk.
Is he
from
on
here.
oxygen?
He is, and he still smokes. So that's safe.
Hey. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he knows I talk about him. He and I have a very close relationship. He knows that I tell stories about him, and he knows that we laugh. But he says, you know what, Nikki, I've smoked my whole life, and I'm going to keep smoking, and there ain't anybody going to tell me how to live my life, and so get over it. And so I have.
Yeah.
But as a result of that, so the story I was going to tell you is we lived in a small town, little rural Oklahoma town. I graduated with 36 people in my class. That's how small. When you think small, I mean small. My nieces just graduated a couple years ago. They graduated with 22 in their class. So it's only getting smaller.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness, right?
Yeah.
Oh, and then my niece this past year told me that 6 of those people weren't actually in her graduating class. They were in the alternate ed class that got to graduate with her class.
Okay.
So she only had, 10 or so in her actual class.
Wow.
So my dad tells me when I asked him, I said, Dad, if something were to happen and you could not take care of yourself.
Does he live alone?
My brother lives with him now.
Okay.
Another weekend. Okay. But I said, where would you choose to live? What would be your goal? Because I don't want to make that decision for you. I want you to tell me what you would want. Would you want to live with us? Would you want to live in Gary, where you live now? How would that work? And he said, well, this was several years back. He said, I'll just move me to the nursing home, which is where his mom had been. And I said, well...
In his little town.
In his little town, yep. I said, okay, if that's what you want, then I at least know we have a plan. Fast forward a few years after that conversation, guess what happened to that little nursing home?
Closed the door.
It closed. The city couldn't manage it anymore. It was no longer, they couldn't staff it. The building was getting old. They couldn't maintain it. So it closed. It's a grow house now for marijuana growers. Right. And I don't even think that's working out, so I don't know. But so my dad, now I had to go back to my dad and say, Dad, if something were to happen, now that we don't have that option available to us, what would you want to do? And what do you think he said, if you had to guess?
Live with you.
I'll just stay right here. I'll just stay right here.
Exactly. I'll just stay right here.
Take me out in a pine box.
Take me out in a pine box. And I said, well, you could live with us. We'd have to move, of course, because we have a 2-story, 2-bedroom condo. We've downsized. And all our bedrooms are upstairs. And I said, and you'd have to quit smoking. He said, that's a deal breaker. I said, yes, it is. So couldn't live with us. Nowhere else he's going to go. So he would live in his own home. I said, okay, how's that going to work? Let's create a plan. And so his mom, he was the primary caregiver for his mom, my grandma. And she had had a stroke early in life, and so she was disabled somewhat. And she ended up in that little nursing home, right? And I said, Dad, I really wouldn't want that for you, but if that is your choice, right? So all he knows is either live in your own home and suck it up and deal with it, or move to the nursing home. He lives about 50 miles from where I live, and I live in Oklahoma City Metro, where we have lots of housing options, and that's not home for him. He would never move to Oklahoma City because it's not home for him, right? And so I guess the whole point in this conversation is don't compare what your plans are going to be based on what your parents' plans were or your grandparents' plans, because the world is different. First of all, thank goodness we have more options now.
Right.
Right. But if you're in rural Oklahoma or rural Florida or in a small town, you may not have as many options.
Sure. So we have to be open-minded to be able to explore what those options could look like for us.
And fast forward 5 years, the options we have now are not going to look the same, just so you know.
Okay. Change is coming.
Change is coming.
Right.
It's already happening every day. Yeah.
Right.
The people who work in the senior industry who are back there know that, right? They're watching it happen as we speak. It's an evolving product.
So we're living longer.
Yep. Whether we like it or not.
Like it or not. What was true, what we think we might know, is not necessarily true today and won't be true
5 years from
10,
now, 10
15 years down the road.
Yep.
What's our number 3 truth?
While we may like to think that we are independent people, we are not.
Ooh, that hits hard.
So let that soak in for a second.
I have a friend in the room. Who's on a knee scooter. Y'all saw me. I was on a knee scooter for 2 months, right? I live alone.
Those are fun.
Oh gosh, hardest thing to ask for help.
Did you?
A little. And my doctor took me out behind the woodshed because I wasn't getting the help that I needed to get and was trying to do everything myself.
You weren't healing as fast as you should.
Correct.
Because you weren't asking for help.
Correct.
Congratulations. You're just like everybody else.
Thank you.
It's hard to ask for help, especially those of us who grew up in a family where, you pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you
do it right.
You just do it.
You do it yourself.
Be responsible. If you're the oldest child, especially.
Or an only.
Yep. So, or you grew up in the Midwest, or you were in a family. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people are what we are. But we like to think of ourselves as independent, and I think it's hilarious that these senior living communities, I love you guys, but independent living is a myth. Nobody lives independently, even if you live in your own house. Case in point. How many of you have replaced your own roof? You're one person. Okay,
and it would be Chris.
Chris, I'm going to keep going. We'll see if you can check. Okay, 20 years ago you did that.
40 years ago.
Would you do it now? No way. Right, yeah. Okay, so how many of you have plumbed your own house? Or built your own house? Or mow your own yard anymore? Okay, some people still do. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so when something breaks in my house, I call the guy. I do not live independently. I require others. When my car breaks down, I do not fix it. I call the guy. Right? Okay, So let's just get really clear. We do not live independently. We rely on each other for various things all the time. Emotional support, physical support. I do not cook my own food 99% of the time. Either my husband cooks it, or we take out, or we go eat out. That is not independent living. If I was living independently, food-wise, I'd have a garden. I'd be growing my own food, and
harvesting and curing the meats and all the things.
So some people did live independently, yes? Especially agricultural parts of the country, and I know Florida, a lot of it's agricultural. People lived independently. And my grandparents, I would say, early on, lived more independently than people do now, because we need services that we can't provide for ourselves. So just to be clear, when people say, I want to stay independent, that's not what you really mean. What we really mean is I want to make independent decisions for myself. I want to be autonomous in my decision making. I want to make my own decisions. I don't want you making decisions for me.
Okay.
Right? So can I break some more bad news?
Yeah.
We don't even get to do that. Truthfully, think about it. Right? There's a certain amount of things that we have to do. We have to pay. There are 3 at least, right? We have to pay taxes. What's the other one?
Die.
Somebody said insurance. Well, you don't have to have insurance, but it sure would be hard to find a place to live here in Florida without it.
Right.
And we do die. We have to die. That's a requirement, right? But we don't get to decide if we want to die or not. That's pretty well decided for us.
Right.
Taxes, I would contend, these days are kind of optional based on some of the political stuff I've seen. I mean, not to get into that discussion. But so for the most part, we do get to make decisions for ourselves in most of the areas that matter.
Right.
Because we live in a free country, thankfully. Right?
But there's a lot of decisions.
There's a lot of decisions. And we need each other. That's the point. So we've got to learn to stop thinking about how independent we are and begin to notice and recognize how much community we need and how important that is.
We've talked about the Blue Zones on Netflix, the show that took those communities across the world living different diets, different medical care options, and the commonality was community and purpose.
Yep, exactly, yeah.
Across all, and this is where there are more centenarians than any other place on the planet.
Yeah, and I saw the documentary on that was really well done, right? And what I was impressed by is that some of those individuals are living in very remote areas.
Yeah.
Right? And so their support systems they're pretty small. Maybe family, maybe a few friends, doctors that come in once a month to check on them and things like that, right? So you don't have to have a huge community, but you do have to have a community you can rely on when you need it. And I think more and more people, often it happens, people outlive their community. They outlive their support network. And my Aunt Sylvia is a great example of that. I'll share with you her experience. She was 92 years old when she moved into a beautiful continuing care retirement community in Oklahoma City. Her support system after her husband passed, she had been a big part of I think the Masonic Lodge. Those of you are familiar with that. She was a Eastern Star. Yeah. And so they were very heavily involved in that, but most of her friends from those organizations have passed away.
And there aren't a lot of young members coming through those organizations today.
They're dying. They're very small now.
Yeah.
And so when her husband passed, my uncle passed away, she really didn't have much of a support network because they were also either aging or had passed. So she had my dad and my uncle who were her support network. And she lived in her own home. And, she says, I'm independent and I'm going to live independent. And I'm like, she is not living independently. Like my uncle and my dad do everything, right, for her and some of us and some of her nieces and nephews, right? But she was so proud, right, so proud that she lived independently until she was going to see a friend. She was still driving. Went to see a friend in her car, went to the friend's house. The friend lived in a gated community with a guard gate and a guard gate and a keypad. And her friend told her to press the button or push the code, whichever. So she did that. She reached across to do that. And when she did, she had neuropathy. She didn't admit that. She'd went through the guard gate in her car, knocked out the security gate brick thing, did not stop until she had hit 2 houses, crossed the street, over a sidewalk, hit 2 houses, one with the rear of her car, one with the front end of her car. Lucky she did not kill a family on the sidewalk. Mm-hmm. That was the fortunate part. Mm-hmm. She was minimally hurt, enough that she had to go and have some procedures done. Mm-hmm. And then wanted to know, when she was discharging from the hospital, when she could go get a new car.
Aunt Sylvia's got spunk.
Fiercely independent. But this is where the psychology of aging really comes in. And this is where I really noticed it, Beth, was I've looked up to her my entire life. Matter of fact, this necklace was hers.
Oh, very pretty.
And at 92, she was struggling with, how do I stay independent over here? How do I ask for help over here? And I don't know if I want to live to be 100, right? She's 92 at this point. She could have easily lived to be 100. Mm-hmm. But my uncle basically said, you're not getting another car.
I think your uncle was wise.
Right? And so he made every effort to keep her from doing that without having to have legal guardianship or anything. He just kept her from doing it physically. I think he duct taped her one day, I'm not sure. But they moved her to a senior living community in town. We were living in Austin at the time. And I came to see her and visit her in her new apartment after she'd been there a few months. And lovely apartment, very well done. And I said, Aunt Sylvia, how are you doing? How are you liking it here? You know, she said, well, if you like prison, it's great. And I said, wow. I said, I don't think of this as prison, but I've never been to prison. So I said, you know, you get 3 squares a day. Yeah. And I said, they'll take you anywhere. She goes, I can't drive. I said, I understand. And I said, so the upside is they'll take you anywhere you want to go. You have a driver, golf cart on premise.
I would love to have a
right?
driver.
I'm like, I am dying to have a driver. My husband just says a few more years and I can get a driver. So I'm pushing hard. I'm working hard, Beth.
Okay.
And so my Aunt Sylvia, her mindset was, if I have to live here, I would just as soon be dead. That was her mindset. And I said, so Aunt Sylvia, I said, there are things you can do. And she said, my legs are giving out. My legs are giving out. And they were giving out. And I said, okay, have we gotten some therapy in here for you? Like, I know there are therapies for these things, right? I'm very familiar with these therapies. Nope, they don't work. I said, how many times did they come? I don't know. Medicare quit paying, and I'm not paying anybody for that. It doesn't work, right? And so I love this woman, and yet I was so disheartened because she had given up. And she had given up because she didn't lose her independence. She lost her autonomy.
Yeah.
She lost her autonomy. She lost her ability to make decisions for herself. My uncle was now making decisions for her. The senior community was making decisions for her. This is when you can eat. This is when you can get picked up for your appointments. These are the things.
She had choices within those boundaries, but somebody else was setting those boundaries.
Yep. And so instead of adapting and saying, okay, I have all these benefits to me, what can I control? She just said, to heck with it. I just assume.
So that's a mindset.
It's a mindset. And when people have strokes, and I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm not a medical doctor, but there's plenty of data out there to support this. When people have reached their later years and they begin to decline, and between their ears is, I would just as soon die than live this way, they manifest a way to die. They have a stroke, they have falls, they have some illness, something. They manifest it. It's part of the human condition. We can do that.
We talk about neuroplasticity a lot, how we can shape our brain.
Either direction.
Right. Positive for the good.
Yep.
And for the negative.
Yep.
And really causes a physiological
absolutely
reaction.
Changes your body chemistry.
Yeah.
Changes your brain. Changes your neurotransmitters and how they operate. Changes everything. Matter of fact, in that book I referred to earlier, the lady that talked, the 103-year-old doctor, she talks about that and how important hope is in this equation. And somebody like my Aunt Sylvia, she had lost hope. And like you said, purpose.
Right.
She had lost hope.
Yeah.
And when you lose hope, and you don't have a reason to live, you don't have a reason to get up in the morning, then you sit there and watch TV all day, which is depressing in and of itself, but it's not about the TV. The TV isn't the problem. It's that
Isolation.
we're isolating ourselves. And so all those things. And by the way, that's not new. That's not just this generation. That's always been the case. The difference being, if you think about it, people didn't have that luxury. A couple of generations back, only 2-3 generations back, people didn't have the luxury of sitting around and watching TV. Why? Because they were independent and they had to go garden, or they weren't going to eat that night.
Right.
They had to go fish, hunt, garden, farm, do
Shell
whatever.
the peas.
They had to do something.
Yeah.
Now, somebody brings us food to our room, albeit in a styrofoam container. But we as a society, as we've evolved, have become somewhat complacent. And, if I may say, lazy. And that's nobody's fault. It's just an evolution. But we have to work hard at countering that. And that's a psychology. That is not a physiology. If you have neuropathy, or you have a scooter that you have to walk on, or you have a mobility challenge and you need a walker, or you need a device of some sort to help you, we have all those. There are no excuses for being sedentary, really.
Right.
There are none, other than I don't want to.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy of it. And so, yeah.
All right, so we got to work
Right.
between our ears. So we've
Right.
got 3 truths. We've got 2 more to cover.
Oh,
Got
yeah. So we did that one.
about
We did that one.
10 minutes.
Let's talk about our kids.
All right.
Yeah.
Kids?
Yes,
Ugh.
kids.
They don't want our stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we actually covered that one, so we can, yeah.
Okay.
All right. So kids. Our kids may not end up being our primary support system.
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
Aren't my kids supposed to take care of me?
Yeah. So how can I ask how old you are?
I am 58,
Okay. And how old is your son?
27.
Okay. I want you to do the math for me. Okay. I know I'm asking you to do math out loud in front of a room of people. So fast forward to when you would be 100. How old will your son be?
70.
Okay.
69, 70.
Yeah. So how's that going to work for you if your son at that age hasn't taken care of himself, or develops an illness or some sort of unfortunate disease process that doesn't allow him to be your primary caregiver? Or you outlive him, which I don't wish upon anybody.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and that's a lot of pressure on him, too.
Yeah. So, funny story about 70-year-olds, real
Yeah.
quick. Okay, so I'm reading this magazine one day about boating. And Chris and I love to boat. When we lived down here in Florida, we had our boat in the Keys for a little while, and in Marco Island for a little while.
love the
We don't
Gulf
have a big
Coast.
boat. We have a 30-foot cabin cruiser. And that's another weekend story if you want to hear it. So I read boating magazines that Chris gets, and this story caught my attention because it was about people who were grappling with not where they were going to live, but whether they were going to give up their boat or not. Equally as big of a challenge for an avid boater, right, as giving up your car for an average human being. Well, so he's telling this, the journalist is telling this story, and he actually said he was going to help a couple receive a new boat and get it in the water and get acclimated to it and all this stuff. And he said the couple was 97 years old and 103, respectively. I don't know which was which husband, which wife, but I'm going to assume the husband was 103, she was 97. And they were upsizing their boat. They were getting a bigger boat because they wanted to be able to accommodate their 70-year-old son who came to stay with them every once in a while on their boat. These were not weekend boaters.
So this was their guest house, essentially.
This was their house.
Okay, they lived on the boat, and they needed room for the family. Okay.
At 103. And it changed this guy's perspective, the journalist who was writing this article, because he asked them, how is it that you continue to boat at this age? He says, I think the guy was in his 50s or something writing the article, and he said, I have friends grappling with when they should give up boating, right? How is it that you're still boating? And their response was, we just said we'd give it up when we were no longer having fun, and well, I guess we're still having fun.
Love that. Love that.
And so the reality is, it's between our ears, right?
Yeah.
It's also physiologically, don't get me wrong. I mean, there is a physiological component to this for sure, right? We got to address that. But today's about psychology. We were at the boat show in Fort Lauderdale some years back. Loved the boat show. And we like getting on the big boats we can't afford, you know. And so we walk along, and there's this beautiful boat. Beautiful, 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 probably 100, I think it was 80, actually 80 some odd foot boat that this couple, that wasn't for sale. They were just there showcasing it.
Okay.
This couple, they were in their mid-90s, and this was their boat. And this huge boat, and I walk up, and they were out there tying lines or doing something. And I asked them, I said, how big is your crew? And he said, well, you're looking at it. And it was he and his wife. And I said, really? I said, you guys crew this boat yourself? And he said, yeah.
Love that.
And I said, how? Right? Like, I can barely manage our 30-foot, you know.
Right.
And they said, well, we've had to make adaptations. And he said, we do certain things a little differently for safety and so on. And they have gadgets now to help them tie off to the dock without having to lean over. And they have different things. And I thought, oh, my goodness. They have made their boat adaptable for them to be on their boat in their 90s. And I have people who won't even put grab rails in their flipping bathroom at home.
Oh.
Right? They won't even put grab bars because it isn't aesthetically pleasing.
I don't need that.
They can't get in and out of the shower without help, but they won't put in grab bars, and these people are adapting an 80-foot boat. It's all between our ears.
Right.
Right? It's just very interesting.
Right.
Back to our kids, though.
Yeah.
So we're 50. I'm 53. Much to my husband's chagrin, he's over 50 now. Our kids are 32. I said, when I'm 100, roughly 100, my son will be 80. My daughter will be 80.
Mm.
I can't expect them to be my primary caregiver when I'm 100. I just can't. So who's going to be my primary caregiver? I'm hoping one of these lovely 4 grandchildren that we have.
That's why you spoil your grandchildren.
Be nice to your grandchildren. But what if they're off doing life, right? What if they're off doing life? I'm looking at who will be the person that I rely on, and it's probably not going to be my children. And so guess what? This is a side note. Can I give them a little bonus side note that's not about psychology?
We will take a bonus from you.
Bonus side note, not about psychology, and I am not an attorney, but I would recommend when you talk to your attorney about setting up your estate plan and whoever you're going to leave all that extra money that you have. I'm not leaving any extra money, by the way, just so you know. But if you have extra money that you're going to leave, I'm going to recommend you consider not leaving it to your kids and leaving it to the person who's going to end up being your what?
Caregiver.
Primary caregiver, which might skip a generation.
Mm.
I'm just saying because some people are saying, oh, my kids are going to get my inheritance.
Or a niece or a nephew or somebody.
Yeah. No, we had ours set up to where our kids were the benefactors of any leftover, and we'll change that here in a few years, and that will actually skip a generation, because my feeling is that, you know what, if you're 80 and you're relying on what I'm leaving you, then you have somewhere gone down the wrong path. And I am not leaving that to you, because you chose to go down the wrong path.
Right.
Does that make sense?
I love it.
But inheritance was supposed to be to help that next generation get rolling, right?
Right.
Or to manage the family business
because
or whatever.
the lifespan was half what it is now.
Yeah, and now we've got people living to 103 and leaving their inheritance to their 80-year-old adult children who have more money than they had.
Right.
It's just craziness.
Yeah.
You know, we're not thinking. We're just doing. Oh, you remember that story about the baking pan? The ham? You want to tell that? It's so fun.
I love this story. I think it's a cheesy preacher
It's
story.
great. Yeah, it's a preacher story.
So the young housewife was getting ready for Christmas dinner, and she asked her husband to get the ham out of the refrigerator and get the big knife to cut it in half.
Cut the ends off.
Oh, well, I was thought
Half? Okay, your story's half, mine's the ends off. Okay,
cut it in half, and we'll put it in the pan and get it going. And the child was there, and it's like, Mom, why do you cut the ham in half? And she said, well, that's the way my mom always did it. You'll have to ask Nana what she thinks. And so the little kid went in to see Nana, and Nana, my mom just cut the ham in half before she cooked it. Why did she do that? Well, that's the way my mama always did it. You're going to have to go ask your Gigi about that. So she went in and she said, Gigi, we're having ham for Christmas dinner and Mama just cut it in half. Why did she do that? And she said, I asked Nana and Nana said it was because you did it. And she said, well, I did it because my pan was small and I couldn't fit the whole thing in it.
We got bigger pans. We just didn't know that we didn't have to cut the ham in half.
Correct.
You know,
yeah, the resources are different.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that story really resonates with me as we talk about this topic, because most of us are operating on autopilot, let's be honest. Right?
Yeah.
We're operating on behaviors that we've modeled from other people, that we were taught from other people, that we read about or that we studied when we were younger. And we sometimes fail to notice that the world has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still operating on the same operations manual. It'd be like if I bought a new car today, a new Lexus. I love my Lexus RX. It's 10 years old, but I love, love, love it. And it'd be like me buying a brand new one and trying to use the operations manual for the old one with the new one. It just would not work.
Yeah.
It's outdated.
Yeah.
But that's what we're doing, is we're operating our decision making as we age on old operational manuals. And we need to update. And so as we update, these topics that you're doing are priceless, because that's really what we're doing, is we're updating our thinking and our behaviors.
Yeah.
And when we do that effectively, we'll do just fine if we live to be 100
Right.
or older.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm sure we have a few questions. Our educational partners, somebody has some microphones. Does anybody have a question? Yeah, we've got one over here. Oh, one right behind you, Gladys, there. We're in tight quarters today.
Okay, is this on?
Yep.
It is.
We can hear.
Yeah, we can hear.
So earlier you said that there were a lot of changes coming in the next 5 years, especially in senior housing continuing in our communities. So what are some of the changes that you see coming down the road?
Changes that you see coming down the road,
Wow.
senior living
There-
options.
There's a lot, but I think the biggest ones that affect most of us are, number one, there are far more people that are going to need them than there are availability. Okay, so the communities now that are struggling to be full, it's because they thought way ahead and they built, and it's the if we build it, they will come model, and they will come, and then they will be full, and there will be a line, a very, very, very long line for all of them. Not just the inexpensive ones like now. The lesser priced ones already have waiting lists.
Right.
If they're subsidized, they definitely have waiting lists.
Yes.
But if they're private and you're paying out of pocket for these, even the ones that you think to yourself, how does anybody afford that, will have waiting lists.
Wow.
That's the first thing. Second thing is many of them are becoming more and more corporatized. They're for profit, not for profit. Okay? And I can't go into that in detail, but I'll give you just one thing to think about on that. When senior living communities were originally conceptualized way back, they were faith-based, not for profit,
Yeah.
or family owned and operated. Most of the nursing homes across the country, just one generation back, were owned and operated by families, and some of them lived there on site or lived right next door, and they managed these. Majority of them now are owned by major corporations, operated by major corporations, and bought and sold daily. They're investment properties. And so as a consumer, you have to be diligent in doing your homework to ask yourself, if I'm going to move into one of these communities, I can't compare it to what it was when it was built 25 years ago. I need to find out what it is today and how that's going to affect me. Because there are things that corporate America doesn't care about that families and not-for-profits care about. And so just do your homework, right? It doesn't make them good or bad. It just makes them different, And leadership in these communities is everything.
Sure. So
Yeah.
it's important to do your homework.
Do your homework.
We have a helpful questionnaire that we use when we take our tours of things that you might like to ask a community.
Perfect.
We'll be doing a tour
Yep.
series in the fall again.
Yeah.
Teresa, I think Teresa had a question.
Okay, to give you some background here, my parents are 92 and 90. And I moved back to Orlando 4 years ago with Beth's help. And through all this, I've helped them age in place with their health care, their finances, getting their home situated. And now coming today, what I realized is I need someone, a psychologist, a therapist, or someone that will help them with this whole thing between the 2 years. How are they perceiving their aging?
Yeah.
Because they come from a background where they have a large community through their work, they're a hairdresser and barber, huge community, but they have all these things in their head too that they've heard, like, well, Medicare won't pay for it, I'm not going to get it. When you said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, they could really benefit from someone besides, and the general practitioner doesn't do
Right,
that,
yeah.
right? So are there people out there that help older people?
That's a great question.
So do we need a therapist?
Yeah. So there are people that do that. So it's tricky, right? Because when you're in your 90s, like my Aunt Sylvia, if you told her you were going to hook her up with a therapist who could help her with her mindset, not so sure that's going to go over very well, right? That said, positioning is everything, right? Positioning that person effectively is everything. So there are, and I'm sure your education partners, including Beth and them, know a lot of these people, but geriatric care managers is kind of the terminology. They're usually social workers or nurses or someone that has some medical experience and some psychology or sociology experience. So licensed clinical social workers are great. Geriatric care managers are going to be great at these kinds of things. But to introduce them to your parents is where it gets tricky. Okay? So what I recommend usually is that you connect with them and you find out from them strategically how you can be helpful to your parents in changing their mindset. Because I can assure you, they are not going to sit with this person and hear them tell them that there's some things they could do to adjust their mindset. They're just not going to. So we have to then adjust our approach to how we deal with them. I'm going to give you the name of a great book. Beth knows what it is. I'm going to tell you, I have paid thousands of dollars for textbooks in the last 30 years. Thousands. You guys have too, many of you, I'm sure. They're like $200, $300 now. $12, $13, maybe $15 max on Amazon. The book is called How to Say It to Seniors. How to Say It to Seniors. It was written in 2004. So some of the wording is a little outdated, but the premise is still good. The author's name is David Solie, S-O-L-I-E. The subtitle really tells you everything. The subtitle, the byline, it's called Closing the Communication Gap Between Our Closing the Communication Gap with Our Elders is the kind of the subtitle. And what he talks about is the divide between the middle-agers and the older adults and how we think and how we operate. And we have clashing goals. We have clashing intentions. And if you think to yourself, well, I don't need to read that because I'm not helping a senior, but you are a senior, if you identify as a senior, you should still read this book.
Yeah.
Right? It's still a good book because what it will do is it will explain to you why your adult children who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s are idiots. I mean, you already know that to be true, but this will explain to you what about that makes it so hard for us to do, right? So my dad should really read it because he would then understand where I'm coming from when I'm helping him.
Yeah.
Because we are in two different wavelengths.
Yeah.
Okay, and that book does a really phenomenal. It's got some scripts in it that you can use. He's got some really practical.
I love the
stuff.
role plays that are in there. Super helpful.
Super.
I've It helped me tremendously.
$15 book, and that, I'm telling you, that is the best book. And if you buy a case of them, I'd buy a case of them and give them to everybody I know. And I don't get any money for that, by the way. I don't get any rebates or anything.
Right. We got time for a couple more questions, maybe, if they're
There
short.
was a gentleman back there.
Dennis?
Hi, thanks. I just want, Beth mentioned a friend who had a niece with her, and I'm married to that lady. And I just want to put a finer point on it because 2 weeks after she got on her scooter, I had open heart surgery. And so we have been each other's caretaker, and all of a sudden I'm sort of immobilized.
Wow.
And she's immobilized, and it's like we hadn't contemplated that. We hadn't contemplated one of us
Right.
not being available.
Yep.
And it really changed our mindset a lot. So you might consider that. If one of you is disabled, what happens if the other of us is disabled as well? It was really, that we need to. So yeah, just to throw that out, just give it some thought because we were in a position where we've been giving it some thought.
Yeah.
And I would also add, you're two very active people who I would envision you of saying a month or two ago, we're not ready to downsize, but you had 2 events that changed that. Is that common?
Oh my gosh. What they went through, it's more and more common because we're living longer together, right? And so, it used to be one spouse died and the other one died shortly thereafter.
Right.
And now both spouses are living. By the way, the age gap where women have always outlived men, right? We know that women kill off their husbands, but that gap is narrowing. The age gap. Men are beginning to live longer now, right? So they're catching up with us because we're being. I don't know if we're being nicer.
They
to
got
them,
our number.
Right? Their jobs are not as hard as they used to be.
Okay.
Right? So the men used to work much harder, much more taxing, physically taxing jobs, and they died sooner. That was kind of the main reason. But now they're living longer because they're living healthier lives, and they've stopped smoking. And smoking is a number one contributor, by the way, to earlier deaths. And so because the society has stopped smoking, either stopped smoking if they were smoking or didn't pick up smoking, that's helped a lot. But to your point, there are so many people, I could give you story after story after story after having done this for so long, of couples in your situation where one of 2 reasons they go ahead and they decide to make a change, a residential change mainly, right? So, and this doesn't mean going to a retirement community, it might. For some people, it means getting out of the big house with all the bedrooms upstairs or the basement or whatever. You guys don't have basements here much, but so it means getting rid of the big house that's hard to manage, that you really don't need anymore, and downsizing into a smaller footprint that's more manageable, or into a retirement community where you have all levels of care, because then once you've made that decision, the rest of the decisions have already been made. You know where you're going to live. And if something's going to if something were to happen to either of you, temporarily need it or permanently need it, it's built into your arrangement. Either way, couples decide to do it. They either do these kind of things because they experience what you experienced. That just happened. What if this happens again and it's more significant and we're not going to rebound quite as quick? They make a move. Or their parents have had crises, and they've had to help their parents either liquidate an estate, downsize, or they've had to handle the nightmare of the family dynamics after their parents who didn't plan were gone. And they go, I'm not doing this to my kids. So they go ahead and they sell their house, move into a lease arrangement, which takes care of that problem. When they're gone, the house just goes back and they don't have to worry about selling it or any of that stuff. They've downsized their stuff, so they do that. The other reason people do it, there's a third reason, not like your situation, is they do it because they have to. It's a crisis. It's a complete crisis. One of them is diagnosed with a terminal illness or a chronic progressive illness, and let's say ALS or dementia, something along the lines of, they go, we had this problem and we knew about it, but now all of a sudden it has progressed to the point where we don't have a choice now. We have to do something. And so they do it. So it's either proactively, first 2 stories, or reactively in reaction to some sort of crisis, a major crisis or just a progressive kind of chronic, gradually then suddenly crisis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and what I said earlier applies to that. And this isn't meant to be a fear-based message. This is just a reality check, guys. Like I have no investment in whether or not you stay put or move. So hear me loud and clear. Nobody back there is paying me if you move. These communities are filling up. And if your plan A is if something happens to me, my spouse, my kids, my life, my house, whatever, I will move here. And that doesn't happen for 10 years. You have had 10 years of bliss. When you decide to do that, you might as well add another 5 years or so because you're on a wait list. So I have a lot of couples now that are moving in their early 70s. And they're doing it because they don't want to be on the wait list if something were to happen, because they did that with their parents, and it was a proverbial nightmare. And so they're like, I'm like, why are you moving into a CCRC, Continuing Care Retirement Community? Why are you doing that? Right? Like, tell me. And they're like, well, we know we're going to be on the younger side, but we'd rather do it now on our own terms.
Better 5 years too early than 1 day too late?
Than be Aunt Sylvia.
Yeah.
Right, so. That's that. I don't know if that answers your question. But,
Awesome.
yeah,
Awesome. Did you guys find this helpful? Anybody learn anything today?
Take care of yourself, man. That's the message, right?
For
Take care of
sure,
yourself. Make
for
some
sure.
decisions. Yeah.
So want to make sure that you've got some action steps written down on your paper. You have your blue forms. Susan is at the desk out front. Nicole is up front. Don't leave without turning those in. You can go ahead and get pre-registered for next month's seminar, which is the 3rd installment in our Heart, Mind, and Emotion series, tackling the topic, the practical and emotional aspects of letting go of house and home. So we're going to take some of what we learned today and put some practical action steps to that.
So next month's the how-to.
It is.
Okay.
Exactly. Thank you so much for coming. We always like to end our series with a quote. And this is one of my favorites from Dionne von Furstenberg.
Oh.
Some of you ladies remember her great dresses, right? Aging is out of your control. How you handle it, though, is in your hands.
Perfect.
You're empowered.
Yay.
Go forth. Take good care.